Hello and welcome to Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik. The Food Sustainability Index just came out this week. France has ranked the first position in terms of minimizing food wastage. Countries such as the US and UK have not ranked as well. Now, this report is extremely important because it tells us about the efforts being made by nations in order to curb food wastage for a more sustainable future. Let's discuss this issue further. We're joined in the studio with Musa Amir, co-founder of Risk, and Yasmin Butt, founder of the support group. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Musa, let's start off by you. So roughly 1/3 of the food produced in the world is not consumed. It's wasted. And that's 1.3 billion tons of food every single year. So what do you think are some of the key reasons why so much food is wasted?
So if you see, there's a lot of food resources, as you already mentioned, but the thing is, it's not properly channelized as such. And there are a host of different reasons for it. All across the supply chain, there are different, mediators working in the supply chain, farm level, to retailer level, to wholesale level, and as I am the consumers themselves. Each one of these people, these segments has their own reasons to waste food. And the major reason that, comes down to it is not having the knowledge about the issue in itself. So, for example, the stat that
lack of awareness.
Yeah, the stat that you quoted, I don't think many people know that. It's an oblivious thing. People don't really know the amount of food wastage that is happening. And that is one of the core issues, because the first step to actually get to a solution is to know the problem. People actually don't know the problem to begin with.
So Yasmin, what do you think are the reasons why people assume that they need to consume more than they actually need to? Because if you could elaborate and tell us a little about how much consumption a person needs per calorie intake in a day, it would be very useful to know how much in fact is needed.
Sure. So as a psychologist, I feel the psyche behind the issue is that it falls under the eating disorder. Right. So there are different kind of eating disorders like binge eating disorder, anorexia nervosa, and bulimic nervosa. So there are different kind of eating disorders, and it directly falls into the fact that why a person needs to consume a lot of food. So it can be directly correlated and comorbid with anxiety and depression, and a difference in the brain chemistry. So a person experiences different brain chemistry and the consumption of and the production of different brain chemicals at different days, right? So if a person is feeling anxious and his body is producing more adrenaline, so he will have this need to either order more food or consume more food, or he will feel that more food will basically make you more happy. So at the same time,
but Yasmin, I mean to ask that it's not just a case of people who are experiencing disorders. We see this on a regular basis.
Sure.
We order more than that is needed. So what is the impulse behind it? I mean, do social factors contribute towards this?
So I'm glad you said the word impulse, because it's also is related with the impulse control disorder. Now, a lot of people among us, they don't understand that what impulse control disorder is. Impulse control disorder basically is that you can't control your impulse to go shopping, or an impulse to show anger or a certain emotion. It can be love as well. It can be any intense emotion that you're experiencing. It can be the impulse to eat as well, right? And it is directly related to the anxiety. If we go down into the biology of it, so in our prefrontal cortex, which basically controls the impulse control or the disorder, if a person's prefrontal cortex is not mature enough, right? So he cannot make.
What do you mean about
decisions.
not mature enough?
Okay, so in growing up years, some of us are very good at critical thinking, decision making, because we are given the opportunity and the chance to do it. So if we don't give our children the chance to make their own decision, we decide for them what to wear, what to eat, where to go, where not to go, and we don't give them the chance to make their own decisions, they don't somehow develop a good decision making skills among themselves, which is why their prefrontal cortex is not very physically mature, right?
Okay.
So they can't make controlled decisions, which is why they just have this impulse and they have to go for it, right? So a person who's experiencing impulse control problems, it doesn't even have to be a disorder, it can be a few symptoms only. If a person is having a great impulse to go shopping and for food, I think that person should practice some of the techniques to avoid that anxiety. Now, anxiety only lasts for 5 minutes. So if a person is having this impulse that I need to order a lot of food, you just need to control that anxiety or that feeling for 5 minutes.
Yasmin will dig a little deeper into
Sure.
all those impulses and the psychological disorders that attribute to it. But Musa, I'd like to move on to you. According to the UN, 820 million people in the world are hungry. And at the same time, we just quoted a figure earlier that says that 1.3 billion tons of food is wasted every year. So how do we reconcile this? So many people are hungry and yet so much food is being produced.
Yeah, so again, it's the problem of identification. So coming from an economics background, you can see this problem from a supply and demand lens. There's a huge supply and there's a huge demand. The problem is the market is failing. The people who actually need the food, the poor people or the people who are food insecure, they don't have access to the supply of demand. So, that is what is needed. For example, in the case of Pakistan, you don't see a rich culture of food banks. Now, globally, food banks are present there to actually identify the demand, and that is why food banks and such systems are globally used to actually channelize all of this excess food, all of the excess philanthropy, you may also add, to people who actually need it. But since you don't have these physical structures or formal or informal structures to actually identify where the need is, there is no chance for you to get all of the food.
Musa, I'm very
to that.
glad that you mentioned the food banks because France, which has ranked at the top of this index, they have taken such measures.
Exactly.
For example, constructed a lot of food banks and made the process more systematic. They've also ensured that supermarkets, they've banned supermarkets from disposing of food and just wasting it away. And since you're involved with RISK, which started off as a grassroots level movement, and now you're dealing with the entire national food supply. What can you tell us a little about how corporations, supermarkets operate in terms of conserving food, wasting food?
So you have to, see it from their perspective. All of these people are in it to do business, and if it's not good for business, they will probably don't, go in to make that effort, to save food. For example, for example, the supermarkets case, there's a lot of food that does go to waste in supermarkets, especially that which is near to expiry. Now, for a supermarket, what they do is they take these products off the shelf because they know that it's not going to, get sold. But on the flip side, there isn't actually any incentive for them to donate such products from the government as well. Normally, what you would see in the likes of France and UK, they have actually made the donation process more easier. For example, many of these supermarkets and retailers, what they fear the most is liability. For example, if they donate said food and somebody ends up getting ill from that, who's to be held
I'd like to
responsible?
bring Yasmin into this conversation, and I feel like she could elaborate a little more about the psyche behind producers who feel like wasting food is perhaps a better option than donating it. What do you think is going on there?
I think it's just a lack of platform, particularly in Pakistan as well. I do believe if Pakistani government made it more easier, if they could lift up the taxes maybe from the supermarkets.
But we're talking about a very international perspective here, not just the Pakistani government.
Sure.
World corporations, supermarkets all across the world, they'd rather throw food in bins than give it to charity.
Sure, I think it was rightly said that they probably fear a liability. There has to be more platforms. There just has to be more and more logistics infrastructure involved in it, more than just how a certain person feels. I think if somebody is wasting the food in the bin, would very much like to donate it as well if they're giving the credit for it.
Yeah, exactly. And just adding on to what she said, it's not just liability, and I think Yasmin can also take it from a psychology perspective. There's also a business angle to it. Obviously, there's profit angle to it. For example, restaurants, normally what they have is that the cost of the food that, let's say the cost of a food to produce that food is $1. They would normally sell it for around $3 to $5, getting all of the margin. Now, to forego that much margin on each unit of food sold is actually a huge loss in terms of expected earnings. So that's why it's a business decision. Secondly, why do restaurants and other institutions make more food is something called the illusion of infinite abundance. And I think Yasmin can also add to her as well. From a consumer point of view, if there are two carts in front of you, one is filled with food and the other has a little bit of food, you would always go to the cart that has more food in it to get more, because you automatically think that because, oh my God, there's so much food in this place. Okay, this automatically looks more attractive. On the flip side, the other
More
ones,
is more.
more is more. On the flip side, if there's a cart, there's little food there, you will automatically think, okay, these are just the leftovers. I don't need to buy this thing. So normally this is the psyche with the restaurants as well. They need to be filled to the brim to accommodate the consumer. So for example, if you go to any restaurant and you don't find food there, you won't probably go to that restaurant again. So it's a business decision. It's, integrated with the consumer psyche as well.
So it's a business model they have to operate on. It's a necessity to produce more.
Yeah, it's necessity to produce more.
So Musa, how is your organization creating awareness amongst these restaurants and creating awareness amongst masses that food wastage actually is a very concerning problem?
So we started with a lot of consumer education campaigns because normally when you waste food, that's just it. You don't go into the nitty-gritties of it. So for example, if I say you waste just a pound of rice. For you, from a consumer perspective, especially from the end consumer's perspective, it's just 1 pound of rice that is being wasted. But actually, it's all the resources that go into making that pound of rice, right? It's the water, it's the energy, it's the transportation, all of that goes to waste. And when you factor in all of these equations, when you factor in all of these variables, the cost to the economy and the cost to the society is actually really huge. And in our scenario...
If I could add to that, from an environmental perspective, when you discard food, you're wasting almost 300 acres of land, 780 million pounds of pesticides, so much gallons of irrigated water. So you're not underutilizing your resources, you're in fact completely wasting them.
Exactly, it's the same thing. And what we found while doing with risk is that when we started to, educate people according to the impact that their minute decision of just wasting, let's say, a pound of rice makes, things started to move on. Then we, went to different restaurants. Obviously, there was a lot of pitching, back and forth. They weren't open to it at first because 3 to 4 years back when we started, this concept was still really in its raw stage. But
did you feel like there was a pushback from these restaurants you approached?
Yes, there was a pushback because, like I said, because of all the reasons that we, already
talked
gave
about.
Liability, business motives. Okay, if they do give us food, are we procuring it and delivering the food to really needy people? Okay, if they are really needy people, are we delivering it in a safe way? Because that is also very necessary. Especially the food in restaurants, it's perishable, right? And the logistics of it and the transportation of it needs to be, systematically be done because otherwise we don't need to, cause more harm.
And people who want to learn from your example all across the world, how can you give them some tips about how to create a sustainable model, especially in terms of how you guys are operating?
Yeah, so basically what you have to do is identify a problem and try to solve it sustainably. And that initially what I say to a lot of students is that just do it. First thing is just do it. You see a problem, just do it. And when you start doing it, you start to see mind maps of different things that you can do and connect one dot to another. And that's how we did it. When we started RIS, we never thought of it to be, a full-time career for us. It was just a volunteer movement. We started it when we were in our sophomore years back in college. But
you guys were very young.
Yeah, we were very young when we started. We were just.
Where did this idea come from? Where did you feel this urge developing?
So we were 3 friends, still best friends. We were friends from way back, and one of our co-founders actually had a dastahan or a soup kitchen going on in his home. For the last 20 years by his mother, sorry. And that idea popped from there. There was, and the other 2 co-founders, me and Qasim, also had a similar story. Something just clicked. So we just realized that when we went out, especially compulsive buying, going to parties and everything, we realized that we were so distant from the values that we were taught at home. And the values that were taught by our elders, even our religion. That's why we named it risk. Yeah, so just to give it that value. And just something just clicked. We saw the problem. We went out. For a better part of 1 year, we didn't know what to do. We were just hustling around, meeting our professors, meeting restaurant experts, everywhere, just to get a solution. And the solution that we came up with was just to make a Facebook page and just float our numbers there.
The era of social media.
Yeah, the era of social media. Just float our numbers there and ask people, if they have any leftover food, be it cooked food, be it in the form of dry ration supplies, we are there to collect it. And it started from there. So that's why when I say, everyone, the first thing is just start. The mechanics of it, the business modeling, everything, how to make it sustainable, it comes to you. And there are a host of different ways you can do that.
Yasmin, what do you think about that concept that more is more? How would you respond to that?
So basically how our brain works is there's a certain chemical produced in our body which is called dopamine, and it's a pleasure chemical. So every single time we buy something new or we eat something or something, it's like more likes on Facebook or we meet more friends, anytime we do something exciting which is new to us, there is a chemical produced called dopamine, which is a pleasure chemical, and which basically stimulates in our prefrontal cortex, and it gives us more energy to move around and be happy, and it also controls the facial expressions as well. So in order to attain that happiness, we usually buy more or we usually eat more. And now the psyche behind that is that most of the time we don't even realize that this is the chemical being produced, and we're only doing it to change our brain
unaware of what's
chemistry.
happening in our
Exactly,
mind.
we're unaware of that. It's just that it gives us happiness. So naturally, buying something more will give us happiness and produce that chemical, which then enables our physical chemistry. So yes, that's why we buy more.
Yeah,
Yes.
and adding on to what Yasmin just said, I see a lot of intersection between psychology and food wastage here as well.
Yes.
For example, one of the major ways that countries like UK and US have tried to curb waste is just introduce simple concepts. So, for example, they have reduced the size of a plate in a buffet. Right? Again, more is more. You try to fill it up. You just reduce the size by a few inches. And what they have seen is that small.
It's the visual perception.
Yeah, the visual
actually.
perception. Small changes. To
Very
your,
slight,
your,
minor changes.
Your regular life,
Kind of to trick the mind.
Kind of to trick the mind, and when the accumulated effect is, gathered, it makes a huge impact. So, small things like this, and I think psychology again here has to, play a really good part in that.
Of course. I think
We have to go to a short break. When we come back, we'll continue. We're having a very interesting conversation about how psychology intersects with food wastage. Stay with us. Hello and welcome back. Before going to break, we were talking about how individuals can take control of the situation of food wastage. We've been joined by Muiz Amjad. Thank you for joining us.
You're most welcome.
So, Mr. Amjad, what do you think is an individual's perspective and ethical duty incumbent upon them in terms of curbing this food wastage?
I think no religion would ever condone wastage of any resource, and especially a resource like food and water. I believe that when we waste these resources, we are actually wasting human life. And there could be nothing more immoral than that. So I don't think there can be any debate on such a topic. Basically, they can't be an opposition on this.
No, that's very true. And before going to break, we were talking about Musa, how this is in fact something that individuals need to take control of themselves. We were also discussing the intersection between psychology and food wastage. Could you elaborate a little more about that?
So wasting, I think it's directly also correlated with negative and positive emotions as well. In growing up years, we do give certain social skills to our kids, but we usually don't teach them empathy, or we don't tell them that how their certain actions can have certain reactions on the environment, right? So probably, like, I was raised in the Middle East and then over here. So I've noticed that we are raised sort of in a little bit of a selfish way. I mean, it's only about the household, right? We are usually not told how to give away the leftovers. And in Pakistan, I've seen a general practice is that if the kids grow up, you sort of save their belongings as a precious memory or something. We usually don't like to give away food. We're like, okay, we'll use it tomorrow or maybe day after tomorrow, and then we just throw it off, right? I think it has to be a cultural practice that, like, I instruct my my maid every single day that any food that is left over, please give it to the blue collar, whoever who comes to the house, and just give it away to beggars. I think everybody has to, it has to be a cultural practice. Like if you go to Turkey, Turkey is very, very hospitable, right? If you just knock on any door, they'll give you free food. Or if you go to any shop, they'll give you free food. Or it's a good Middle Eastern practice. If you go to Khana Kaaba, they give you free food, right? So I think it just has to be a cultural practice.
Mr. Amjad, do you agree with that the lack of empathy is responsible behind wasting food?
I very much agree with that. In fact, I would think that it should be seen as a system, the whole thing. The way, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know the other person, but you know, the way she's just said.
Yasmin.
That all right. So it should be taken at a systems level. You know, we can't be reductionist. I mean, food is one part of our problem. We are not just wasting food. There's a lot of extravagance. And that shows that our values are actually quite distorted. We need to review the whole thing.
But Mr. Amjad, which values are you specifically talking about? Because wasting food isn't just limited to one culture. It's happening globally.
No, actually, that is quite true. But that is the way it is going. I mean, what I'm saying is that the whole culture, global culture, is actually moving toward liberalism and materialism. And materialistic values, when they become, you know, they become general, what they do is they eat away the basic morals of the society, and empathy obviously is one of them. I fully agree with that.
How do you believe that people can inculcate more empathy within themselves and within the people around them?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Okay. I think there can be a complete training on that, but that would obviously be, you see, empathy is basically a part of us. It's a natural part of us. All that needs to be done is to remove the dirt that has settled upon it. We basically have this natural tendency. When neuroscientists were studying about it, they were surprised. They were actually conducting experiments on monkeys. And there was a certain thing called mirror neurons that was discovered. It was a serendipitous discovery that suddenly came on scene. And from there, we realized that every human being has those mirror neurons. When something is happening to somebody, we can feel that happening to us, inside us. And
So-
that was the basis of empathy.
Are you saying that intrinsically humans are designed in a way that they can feel what others are feeling?
And then we are conditioned. To move away from that.
Musa, how were you able to inculcate empathy within people and convince them that donating food is the way to go?
So, like, totally agree what the thing is going around. Compassion is the key here, right? In my experience, the way we saw, how people interacted is that all of these people already wanted to do good. Right? So it's not like we lack empathy. We already have a lot of compassion, and like the sir said, it's automatically conditioned away from us. But one of the other things that we realize as well is that showing compassion has also been made hard, right? So if you want to donate food, how are you going to do that? It's such a complicated procedure. You want to donate food to a verified beneficiary, which is really deserving of it. But how can you go about finding that said beneficiary?
And plus the fact that it's a perishable good makes the whole process even more complicated.
It's become so cumbersome, So showing kindness shouldn't be hard, right? So how can we make it easy for people to show their kindness? And that's what we try to do. And it's as simple as, so like Yasmin said, I instruct my maid to, distribute food every day if there's any leftover food available. That's how you start. And considering now, there's also a quote by Hazrat Ali that there are enough resources, Allah sends enough resources, enough risk on the earth. It's just the case that somebody takes somebody else's. Right? So again, it's a similar concept, and that's, I think, the thing that was we were talking also about how religion propagates, showing compassion and distributing more food rather than wasting, and then that everything ties into that. So when you use your existing, resources, existing learnings that are already present in your culture, that are already present in your religion, and you just leverage on that, and you make the entire process of donation and showing compassion easy, I don't see any, problem. This problem can be solved.
I'd like to play the devil's advocate here and Yasmin ask you, as humans, do you think we're resistant to sharing stuff? Do you think that there's this very strong urge of being possessive about our belongings, which extends to even food?
Absolutely. So there's a concept called trauma counseling or loss counseling, right? So every single time we lose something or something is taken away from us or we give away something, we have certain emotions attached with it. Like, for example, if I've cooked a meal and I put certain energy into it because I went to the grocery and I cooked that meal, right, and I wanted to eat it, but I couldn't finish it. I still have some emotions attached to it. The same way, if I bought this sweater, I couldn't wear it enough times in the next winters. I have a lot of stuff and I have to give away something. There were certain emotions, a certain emotional investment, financial investment attached to it, right? So not all of us are prepared for loss. So I think my first experience with the loss was we were a war refugee. My father was in Kuwait, the army, and we survived the Gulf War. So we lost our house, we slept on the roads, we lost everything that belonged to us. So as a very young kid, I had an experience to lose things, right? And then I lost my brothers and then other things. And so yes. Just that the more and more we immune to getting, to losing things, we become more and more stronger. But the same way, there are certain coping strategies attached to it. So when we are teaching our kids that how to give away things, we have to give them some kind of reward as well. And it can be in the form of like shabash, it's a very good thing that you did that, or you can give them a toffee. Like, for example, I was teaching my nephews that how to donate some stuff, right? So I said anyone would donate one of their possessions, I'll give them a chocolate, right? So there's a reinforcement attached to it. Normally, we don't do anything when there's no reward present for it, or if there is no one else to tell us that it was a good deed, you did something good, right? So I think if we attach some kind of reward with it, so it will be good. Like, for example, a friend of mine, she's running this startup called Trash Masti, and if you give away your trash, they'll recycle it, but as a reinforcement, they give you 100 rupees against every single trash, right? Now, 100 rupees doesn't mean a lot to you, but still, there is some reward attached to it, right? So you don't have to give it to the kude wala, you can give it to actually, the Trash Masti, right? So I think there is a psychology behind, losing things.
Mr. Amjad, do you believe that inculcating empathy needs to begin from a very young age, or do you think there's hope for people who've gone beyond just young adult, from childhood, and they've progressed into adulthood? Do you think that they can still be redeemed?
I think they can be redeemed, but it has to start from a younger age. And I would like to comment a little on rewarding
of course.
For moral good. I think that behaviorists would obviously agree with that. I think one of the most important things is to understand the cognitive aspects that are lying behind that. If we would take a person because there are two things, we need to separate them. One is losing something and one is giving away. And I feel that from the very beginning, a child can be conditioned into sharing as well as into competition. If you're a competitive child, you would never like to share. But if you're a cooperative child and you're conditioned into cooperation, because one thing we need to remember, if we put a child in a reward and punishment environment, what we are teaching the child is to do the moral things when somebody is watching so that you could be rewarded. And on the other hand, I would suggest that if you just simply ask the child, how do you feel when you give something to somebody who's in need? I think it's the intrinsic good that needs to be sort of augmented. And once we can do that, we can develop the intrinsic motivation to bring the child's best out for the world. So that is my take on that. But as far as your question is concerned, yes, I believe empathy can be developed. It can be experienced at a later stage as well as at an earlier stage. But obviously, then when you start developing that for an adult, you're actually striving for unlearning and then relearning something. Because we have, again, I'm coming back to that word, we have been conditioned not to be empathic so that we be practical, in quotes, being pragmatic, and that is where we lose our humanity sometimes.
Musa, Pakistan has ranked 106 out of 119 countries on the Global Hunger Index. What is the situation in terms of production and supply? Where do you think we're losing out?
So when we talk about the food supply chain, right, it's a chaos almost in every domain. From the farm level, there are, it's always going to be a, continuous progress to innovate and, introduce better farming techniques, then to the wholesaler, then to the retailer, then to the consumers, and then to the household. So as I was saying earlier, that each one of these domains has its own set of problems. And the intersection between these domains also has a whole set of problems. For example, I think psychology, again, ties here really well. What's your spending pattern? What's your consumption pattern? Normally, what you would do when you go to buy groceries, you go to buy them at the end of a month. And when you go to buy them at the end of the month, you try to stock as much as possible, right? And you're never going to be able to use that stock. But what that does above the supply chain is that it, forces the farms and the wholesalers and everything else to produce more and actually produce more than you need, right? And that's going to, end up being wasted. And so, if it comes down to the individual. If you can make small changes into your patterns, for example, if a consumer, instead of shopping monthly, shops weekly, right? He can not only get fresher food, he can get, stock that is only needed for him. So this ties into each segment domain, and this is just one of the examples.
But in developing countries, it's stated that most of the problem lies on the supply end, and whereas in developed countries, most of the problem lies at the retail end. So what's happening in Pakistan's specific case here?
Yeah, it's both, because the economy is not that formalized as of yet, especially the food industry, right? So again, in Pakistan, at the supply end, there's a lot of loss at the farm level, because of different practices. We still haven't, been able to, efficiently, start using our own capacity. The irony is that Pakistan is one of the richest bread baskets in the world, right? So how is it possible that we continuously struggle to feed ourselves, right? And that actually translates, then goes on to the wholesaler, et cetera, In wholesalers, one of the major reasons that we waste food, for example, is the non-standardization of expiry date labels. You don't know. There's a use by date, there's a best before date. Normally, there's a difference between both of these dates, right? But the end consumer actually doesn't know. And so the wholesaler and,
there's miscommunication,
the retailers actually, profit off of that. So that actually means that they can sell more food, right? So this is a whole chain, and we will have to, pick each domain and, create innovative solutions to, solve the problems for each domain.
At each and every step.
Each and every step.
We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we're going to continue our conversation with our guests. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. With Black Friday sales all across the world last week, millions of consumers went out to shop. But not all these consumers ultimately are happy. That's what minimalists say. Let's watch a little report to see what they talk about further.
So much time on the hunt, but nothing ever quite does it for us. And we get so wrapped up in the hunt that it kind of makes us miserable.
Black Friday shopping mania is still playing out tonight at malls across America.
High hopes of saving some big bucks on those holiday gifts.
Stores filled to the brim.
In some cases, it did turn violent.
We've, as a culture, have lost our minds.
There's no question that what it means to have achieved the American dream has increased tremendously in material terms.
This is not something that just happened yesterday. This is something that has been sold to us over the past 100 years by those that want to make a whole lot of money.
Now that's what I call a good-looking car.
You have this thing that you were obsessed about, but then the new version comes out, and now you no longer care about the one you have. In fact, the one you have is a source of dissatisfaction.
People are beginning to recognize that they've maybe been tricked.
There is no out until you become aware. You're not going to get happier by consuming more.
Ready?
I was born ready.
There's nothing wrong with consumption. The problem is compulsory consumption. We're tired of it. We're tired of acquiring things because that's what we're supposed to do.
When I heard about minimalism, it wasn't about just getting rid of my stuff. It was about taking control of my life and stop being told what to do and actually deciding what I wanted to do.
When I first started reducing the number of things in my life, I found out that I had 51 things in the entire world.
We've probably sold or donated at least 90% of our stuff.
As I started to move that stuff out, I was able to finally realize what I had sacrificed.
I don't know what the most common 3 words are in American homes. I don't know if it's I love you or if it's I want that.
This same thing that's not making us happy is also causing the degradation of our habitat.
We're going to have to give up a lot. The secret is that a lot of that we're not actually going to miss.
What I found with minimalism is it's a way of saying, let's stop the madness.
When you recognize that this life is yours and that it is your one and only, and when that seeps directly in your bones and you recognize that this is it.
That was a short clip about a documentary about the minimalistic lifestyle, but there's more. These people who now adapt this lifestyle talk about how it transforms them. Let's watch a little about that.
It's 6 a.m. I've trained myself to wake up at the same time every day, so I have no need for an alarm clock. My name's Matt, and this is a day in the life of a minimalist. My life is about efficiency, optimization, multifunctionality. Nothing goes to waste. You may notice that I don't have a garbage bin. That's because I don't have anything to throw away. This may look like just a normal cereal bowl to the non-minimalist, but to a minimalist, it's also a coffee cup. If it does not add value to my life, I get rid of it. Some have asked me, what about things that bring you joy? I got rid of that as well.
So that's how people are decluttering their lives. We're in conversation with Yasmin Butt and Muiz Amjad. So what do you think about people decluttering their lives in this way, Yasmin?
So I think I decluttered my life a couple of years ago as well, especially when I started my startup called The Support Crop. So initially what I did was I put all my job savings into renting an office and buying office furniture, and we thought that the clients will just start popping in. Anyway, we had clients, we were making money. But the problem was that after 6 months, I realized that I was just running business for the sake of running a business. All the money that was coming from the clients, what we were doing is either I was sending it into salaries or maintaining the office, and eventually the sense of satisfaction or the sense of accomplishment, it wasn't going anywhere. I was making.
Was it going down, or
it was going down actually? Also because I was putting in a lot. I was putting in extra hours to work, and every single month I was just more and more stressed into making that the same amount of money in order to pay bills. So what we did was that I sold all the furniture that we had bought for our new office, and we moved to a co-working space where we could just use. I mean, it was a co-sharing space, and I had to fire a couple of employees as well, and we started with a lean team, and it worked out well. So what happened was now we were making more profits. It was not because we were making more revenue. It was saying that we had to pay less bills and we had to spend less on the maintenance, and we were more happy. I was able to travel more. I was able to enjoy more. Earlier, I was working 16 to 18 hours a day, and now I only work 6 to 8 hours a day, and I think, more happy, and I'm able to do 3 jobs. I teach in a university. I see patients, and we do group therapy every single week. So I'm actually enjoying my work. I'd gained a lot of weight. I gained like 13 kgs just into, just out of stressing out that I had to make those work hours. I was sleeping less.
So you're saying that the psychological impact manifests itself once you declutter your physical space.
True.
Mr. Amjad, what do you say about that? In this world where consumers are being more and more drawn to sales, to malls, how do you think that the minimalistic lifestyle fits into that?
I would avoid labeling things. I think let's talk about values first. I think living a simple life, which is not basically a materialistic life, my value is not based on, or my self-esteem is not based on what I possess, but it is unconditional. But if you look at it from this perspective, You see, again, going back to the conditioning part, from the very beginning, we are conditioned on the basis of conditional self-esteem as well. So if I have something, that is what creates my value, you know. And if that is the case, and bringing it into an even broader perspective, let us look at the whole capitalistic, model of economy.
Mr. Amjad, do you believe in recent times people are hinging their self-esteem more and more on consumer goods?
Absolutely. That is what the message is. That is what the message is from all over the media, that if I don't possess something, I don't have that value as compared to the other person. If this is the message that I'm getting, then obviously Black Friday is going to be a blessing for me because everything would be on sale. But otherwise, I feel deprived if I don't possess all those things which others have. And this is the message that I'm bombarded with.
But can we place all the blame on media itself, or is this an intrinsic desire of people to acquire more and more goods?
You see, the intrinsic desire of people primarily is to be happy. And what we have done is attach happiness to possession. And let me be very, very clear about this, that, Daniel Gilbert, who conducted this research, he's a Harvard professor, and he has very clearly and unequivocally stated that happiness does not lie in possessions, it lies in experiences. You know, the kind of experiences that we go through life, they can be a source of joy. But your possessions, as it was beautifully narrated in this documentary that you just showed, when I possess an iPhone 10, that apparently gives me happiness, but soon there'll be an iPhone 11 in the market. And I will feel deprived because I don't possess that anymore. You see, this is what happens in the possession-based model of happiness. And in the experience-based, if I have been with my family or with my loved ones, if I have been to a place, and I can see those pictures and once again relive that whole experience once again in my mind and be as joyful today. So unfortunately, what is happening is, because this is a business model and all businesses thrive on my buying things, on making me feel that if I don't buy a particular thing, I'm not complete, I'm not valued.
Mr. Amjad, let's bring Yasmin into this conversation of happiness. So we're living in one of the most innovative times in modern history, and yet depression rates, specifically amongst young adults, are at an all-time high. So what does that really say about our material world and our emotional state?
First of all, I'd like to state the stats of the depression, because I think it's very important for us to know the magnitude of the issue. 400 million people around the world are diagnosed with depression every single year. 6 million out of them die every year, 50,000 from the suicides alone. So, and in Pakistan as well, if you see, Lahore has the highest depression rate. And 40% of Lahore is suffering from depression, 34% is suffering from stress, and only 2% or 2 to 3% of the total population goes to seek help, right? So whenever we find depression and we have certain kind of anxiety or stress, we don't really seek help. And just because it goes unnoticed, that is why we develop more and more complicated issues. Now, coming back to the materialism and the self-esteem issue, I think the self-esteem and the motivation to be a minimalistic has to come from somewhere. We're usually very smart to label that that experiences are good and possession is, experiences are a good experience and it's more important to do that. But I think the motivation for that has to come from somewhere. A person has to learn, when he goes through life, he has to learn to some experience that how can I be a minimalistic. So recently I conducted this intervention for an organization. It was an IT company, and they told me that ever since we have expanded, we have seen a certain trend in our employees that they started using more resources. They started taking more printouts, they started ordering more food, started taking more tea. So just because we have expanded, it has enabled them, it has enabled a trend, or it has established a trend that we need to consume more. So we designed a couple of strategies for them, in which we took them through a few exercises in which we told them how to be happy through less resources, right? So it's the same way. I remember when we moved back to Pakistan, that's how my mother told us how to be happy with less resources. Like we didn't have to possess a lot of things. We didn't have to, possess a lot of televisions. We all of us, could get together in front of one television, the entire family, and have fun, right? So our emotions and our self-esteem is just like a habit.
That's a very interesting point you mentioned, because that anecdote kind of shows that when you share technology, it almost creates this environment of sorts.
True.
But now that we have like personalized technology, do you think people are experiencing more and more alienation? And that's what's leading to depression as well, for example?
Of course, absolutely. So that's also one of the reasons, because we have less and less human interaction. If we do realize people are more and more lonelier than ever imagine. Like you can order food online, you can order anything online. You don't have to move out of the house. You don't even have to interact with a family or anyone. You can even, if you have to say something to your family member, you can just call them up, or call them or text them maybe, and it'll get done. And which is why it is enabling more and more loneliness, that we interact more and more with people through social media, right? So depression is basically, let me tell you the symptoms of depression so that people do understand what are we talking about. So if you don't feel like doing something, or if you don't enjoy the taste of the food, or if you feel like sleeping more or less, and if there's a weight reduction or a weight gain, or basically you don't feel pleasure in anything, or you feel suicidal, or you feel empty inside, right? So basically,
but are there different degrees of depression? Because
of course.
I want to know, and I feel like the viewers, it would be helpful for them to know too, that sometimes there are some symptoms that you ignore because you feel like they are very minute, they are very trivial, not having enough sleep or not wanting to eat enough. So can depression be more subtle than we think?
No. So basically there are different symptoms, and a person has to be very educated about his own lifestyle and the way he's experiencing symptoms, and the other people as well. They should be able to tell that the other person is experiencing some kind of issue. The major symptom is when you don't feel like doing anything, right? A, that. B, if you see a person who's generally sad or crying, like generally gets more emotional about something, for example, watching a movie and crying, seeing something crying, and talking about someone and starts crying. If a person is crying a lot and saying things like, I don't think there's a meaning to life, or what will special come out of it if I go to this event, or what would be special enough for me if I go to this wedding, that is a symptom of depression and suicidal ideation actually. We don't usually, we can't tell if a person is feeling suicidal just because he's not going to say that I'm going to commit suicide, right? He's just going to have suicidal comments.
Certain signs that people
certain
have
statements.
to identify.
So if you see a person is not brushing their hair regularly, if they're not dressing up properly, if they used to before, and if a person's posture is like this and always feeling less energetic and saying that I don't have the energy to do this, they're not even this voice volume is very low, it's a very strong sign of depression. That is also the reason why the rate of depression is increasing, because a lot of people, they go unreported. So just because we don't see a person going completely mad, we feel that, oh, that person is completely fine or all right, right? We need to see the initial symptoms.
Mr. Amjad, what do you have to say about the fact that technology and more consumer goods are alienating people? What is your opinion about that?
I think rather than just looking at these negatives, I think there are certain things that we have, these things have replaced. And on top of everything else, it is the social connection. And I quite agree with Yasmin over here that, we have a kind of a disconnect with human elements in the society. We don't sit with our family as much. I mean, if I have to send a message to my son, I'll probably use the WhatsApp rather than sit with him and talk to him and interact with him at a very personal, at a human level.
So it's very interesting that you say that, Mr. Amjad, since if you are also reaching out to your son, you'd use WhatsApp. And most people associate this phenomena to only the millennials who use technology more. So it's also happening in the previous generations.
Absolutely, I think that is what we have.
I think the response is conditioned us.
I would confess
Probably.
that this is the case with me as well. But the thing is that if the other person is not available, And if we are going to talk on this, this is going to remove the human element. And what I'm trying to point out over here is that unless we bring back that human element, and technology definitely has its place, but it has to be put at the right place. Otherwise, the humanized society would become a technical society. And as I believe that Yasmin is also an expert in emotions and emotional studies, I believe that this is going to be very undermining to the human emotions, which make us ultimately humane and humans.
Mr. Amjad, do you believe that the minimalistic lifestyle is compatible with our everyday reality, letting go of so many objects and just surviving on the basic necessities?
You see, the everyday, when we talk about the everyday reality, we are talking about the status quo. And I have always considered myself, I've always been a teacher myself. I have been in education. I'm in emotional intelligence studies and things like that. And I believe honestly that we are trying to be change agents. And when we talk about change agents, we are trying to develop those values which will bring back that human element. If we are talking about maintaining the status quo and then trying to correct things, it can only be through a reductionist approach. As I started my discussion over here, we have to take a systems approach to the whole thing. I mean, everything in the society is affecting the others, And unless we take that systems approach and see what is the role of the education system over here, how are the parents dealing with their kids, how is the media, giving us what kind of messages are we bombarded with through all kinds of media? I mean, not just television. It is the newspapers. It is the magazines. I mean, are we being told that what kind of experiences would give us happiness? These are the things that we need to understand and change, actually. Because at the moment, the message that we are getting is that only possessions. And when we talk about minimalists, I don't know what kind of minimalists are we talking about, but it's a simple lifestyle that is going to give you happiness. I mean, a brilliant experiment was conducted, once again, by Dan Gilbert, in which he said that, if a person wins a lottery for $1 million and another person loses his legs today, after 6 months, both these people would be at the same level of happiness which they were in before this incident today. It will only take 6 months. We are looking at the short-term, happiness or the short-term glory that we might get through possessions that is actually pushing the whole economy forward.
Yasmin, do you feel like tactics have shifted in recent times due to all these consumer goods, which is causing a rise in depression amongst young adults?
Of course. So I believe that we as parents as well, we have adopted to the lifestyle in which we feel that how our children respond to it. Like, for example, why we are more and more inclined towards using WhatsApp and technology and iPads, it's the only way our children respond. Like, the child would not eat until he's watching cartoons.
But isn't that a circular argument? Because kids are only taught what their parents teach them. So saying that parents are responding to the kids, the parents have first brought these technologies given them to the kids, and that's why they're...
Of course, but the kid socializes as well. He goes to the other houses and meets his friends and asks for those things, and that's why we are we supply as according to the demand, right? And also, as a parent, we feel an urge to be able to provide more and more to our offsprings, right? Without having to notice. And also because we as parents, we are not given a training to be a better parent, right? Nobody tells us how to parent.
It is definitely a learning process.
It's a learning curve. I mean, me being a psychologist is altogether different for me, but I do believe that other people who walk into marriage and have kids, so there's just a lack of understanding that how they can be more and more engaging with their kids. But I do believe that human interactions enable a general level of happiness, and people who do participate in group therapies have a lower level of depression. I'd like to introduce what we do in our organization.
That's very key point now here, Kid, how we move towards solutions of depression and our alienation. Please elaborate on that.
Sure. So my organization only focuses on keeping group therapy workshops. So I was a trainer for the last 8 years, and my last job was at Zameen.com as head of trainings. And something that I noticed was that lecture-based trainings were not working because people were either competing against each other, they were only absorbing information. So what I did was I quit my job and I started this small counseling community, which is called the Support Drop. And you can find it on Facebook as well. We keep laughter therapy workshops every single week. And we keep 2 to 3 laughter therapy workshops.
What is this laughter therapy?
So in laughter therapy, we start with a guided meditation. So we enter into a room and we meditate for about 40 minutes together, and then we laugh for 40 minutes together. We do funny exercises. We silly, poses. Exactly. We let loose completely. And the best part is that in those 40 minutes, people are interacting with each other as if they really know each other. They're laughing, the lungs
Human contact
out.
is amplified.
And the funny part is, and in fact, not so funny part is that after the laughter therapy, we all just sit down. We don't ask people their stories. People just naturally feel encouraged to tell their stories. If anybody is going through a bad time or a breakup or an anxiety or anything they've gone through life, they just start sharing it with each other, right? And then what we do is we add them into our WhatsApp group and they start interacting with each other. Uske baad, they're going out for parties together, they're going to dinners together, they become friends. We basically enable a platform for people to get together. Now, in the testimonials, something that I've noticed how people explain this experience is that they usually say that I've never felt this much connected with people. I've never felt this much relevant. Most of them who are going through a certain kind of depression, they say we start feeling irrelevant. And this group therapy has enabled us to come together and share feelings with someone and meet like-minded people.
Mr. Amjad, do you feel like theology and philosophy offer a solution to our modern day dilemmas in terms of depression and psychological illnesses?
I think they can at a philosophical level they can give you a basis for hope, but ultimately, you see, a child is not trained in theology. You cannot train a child at a theological level or at a philosophical level. Ultimately, it boils down to the culture and the environment, and I really commend this effort, and this is wonderful, because I honestly believe that the biggest investment we can make against depression is the social investment. Connecting people at a people's level, at a human level.
Human-to-human contact, focusing on that.
Exactly, and ultimately, sharing our stories, because ultimately we are all humans inside, and we all have our problems. And, listening to another person's problems and listening to another person's striving, it can give us hope that we can also try. And there's no end to this effort that we can make.
Thank you so much, Mr. Amjad, for that last message. Hope is definitely necessary. Thank you for joining us, Yasmin Budd and Mr. Muiz Amjad. Hope you liked today's episode, and we hope to see you again next week.